Hello ladies and gentlemen, Hydra here with our fourth video on the GM tip series. We got a lot to talk about today. This is a meaty one, bit of a grown-up one, but hopefully a really useful one as well. We're going to be delving into what is wanton cost and how to manage wanton cost as a GM. So, by the end of this video, not only are you going to understand in more detail what wanton cost is, but you're also going to understand how to evaluate it. How to look at it during your second act in order to create a gradually escalating sense of drama and tension that ends in an awesome crescendo and a great boss fight. A great final conclusion to a campaign. Now, finishing up a campaign will be covered in another video, tying up stories, etc. But for now, let us focus on wanton cost. Now, we do need to redefine them. We have mentioned it in the previous video, but want and cost are effectively generated by incidents, or they're present during incidents, but they cannot exist without the precipitating event. Let's rewind. First, when we play a game, we have our introductory phase, our Act 1, according to Aristotle at least. If you're going with a 3-act structure, your characters will explore, they will look around, they'll get to know the world, they will set their stories in place, and then an event will trigger the end of Act 1, the beginning of Act 2. It will signal that transition, at which point things will never be the same again. Things will change, the status quo will have changed, and there will be a desired outcome from the hero's journey. From the heroes being the characters, your players, from their journey. It might be a change in state, from in danger to safe. It might be to save a person, to get an item, to qualify as a doctor. It doesn't matter. That is your journey that you've started. Now, along that route, we've got our incidents. Those incidents create the story by allowing the players to react to them, thus inputting story. Remember, you as the GM, therefore, are not a storyteller. You are simply providing opportunities for players to tell the story. And at this point as well, these incidents during that second act gradually accumulate more stress, tension, drama, whatever you want to call it, however you want to look at it. This accumulates through the second act to get to a point of almost lost hope, where things are looking really desperate. And that's a great place to be before something happens at your group, then realize, yes, we'll do this. And then awesome boss fight, conclusion of campaign. Fantastic. So before we delve into the more detail as to how to evaluate costs, we need to just quickly respect the fact that humans are not fiction. These are not fictional characters sat around our table, but these are people. And they're going to bring all of their BS, crazy, nuts, weird stuff there to the table as well. You're going to have people problems at the table. You're going to have clashes of expectation. You're going to have clashes of personality. It depends who you're playing with and a lot of variables. But just remember, you're playing with people, not chess pieces. So as tempting as it is as a, quote, storyteller, and I really have gone off of this word recently, to manipulate your characters into telling the story that you want to appear, the first mistake you made is having a particular story you wanted to appear. That's not your job. You're there to allow the players to tell the story, but you can certainly help them. Anyway, humans are not fiction, they are crazy. Keep that in mind. Things we have to consider with our players at the table is their experience level. If they are incredibly experienced, chances are they're already bored of stat-sticking TTRPG play if they've played it for that long, and they probably want to come up with interesting ways to die, and weird things that their character can do, and strange, different things that can be done within a TTRPG. The chances are they'll be more open within the TTRPG experience to things out of the ordinary, which includes great storytelling. So that's easier to work with in some ways. However, the newer player may come to the game with expectations set from board games, which is to say that there'll be more of a mechanical focus and less of an expectation at being costs, or less of an expectation that there will be costs associated with their wants. So they will simply expect to go on, get the thing they want, gain power, and then move on to the next thing. And that is what we see a lot in games these days, and that's the sort of the gamification of TTRPGs, I think. There's not so much of an emphasis on storytelling, so if someone's fresh, factor that in. Set their expectations, talk to them. But consider as well, it doesn't matter if you tell someone, hey, this is going to be really story-driven. If they're not interested in stories, but they're your friend and coming to the table anyway to be polite, you can't make them interested in that if they're not. That's where we have to consider their individual character. Some people will see their players, and I would say most people will see their players as an avatar of themselves. Even if they lie to themselves and say, yeah, this is a different person, they're still walking around playing as themselves. It's blooming obvious when you watch them. I would say that's probably 75% of people. So you have to factor this in. If that person is incredibly invested in the story and you give them a narrative consequence that is incredibly, let's say, harsh, that's not necessarily going to go down that well. Or maybe it will go down brilliantly if you sell it just right. And we're going to talk about selling it just right, of course. Now, investment maturity as well. Some people will have different views at the table as to what can be done, if it's generally a thing to all have fun, sit around. Different level of play, I would say. Not even it's like one level's better than the other, it's just a different type of play. If you just want to sit around, roll dice every now and again, smash some goblins up, that's cool. No problem. I'm coming at this from the art of storytelling and implementing this into your game to hopefully improve it in that direction if it's a direction you want. But don't for a moment think this is mandatory. But what I will say is one of the most useful things you'll take away from this video is that players can choose their own costs to a degree. And this is where I've seen comments before saying, well, no, you shouldn't punish players when they have invested significant resources and done smart stuff. Okay. But they have paid a cost. This is why the word punish should be thrown out the window. You're not punishing anyone for anything. It's a cost. So a cost might be that you invested 3 days building equipment, purchasing items, or you traveled somewhere, losing time to gain a thing to help you with your incident. Okay, you've paid some cost, you've lost money, you've lost resources, you've lost time. That's a cost. Now, the question is, and this is where this is what you'll have to ask about every single one of these is, has it changed the drama or tension? Is there anything I could do to make it change the drama or tension? If they've lost 3 days preparing for a fight, what else has gone wrong in those 3 days as a consequence? So it's not that it's going to be a direct, quote, punishment for it. No, of course not. But there may be a consequence of it. And what I will ask you is it believable, reasonable, or inevitable? Because if it meets these three, I think your players will be fine with it 99% of the time. Now, what do I mean by this? Is it believable? Within the setting, within what happens within the setting, the genre, perhaps. In horror, you may come into it and expect NPCs to die. It's a horror genre. You may have started it with a precipitating event hinting that, hey, a bunch of NPCs were just slaughtered. Out in the barn. One of them's been strung up and is inside out. There are 8 candles on the floor. One flame has gone out. The next one is flickering. And you hear a scream. The candle was snubbed. Okay, we've set expectations now that NPCs are very killable. If you haven't set expectations of that, it may not be believable, and the same will be that it may not be reasonable if you have a character who has been set up to be a little bit of a maverick type, petty criminal, and you piss him off and all of a sudden he breaks into your room and is trying to stab you. Well, he was a petty criminal, not a hitman, not an assassin. That doesn't make sense. Or maybe some nutter, some absolute nutter that you've already made out to be unreasonable, such as a witch hunter who comes to your town from our first campaign. Maybe that witch hunter has already been said to just simply take people from each town and burn them, just simply as a sign of faith. and a warning to others. He is unreasonable, so when he makes an unreasonable request of the group, that way it seems inevitable and reasonable because he's unreasonable. So don't feel that it's always got to be totally fair. If a big bad kidnaps one of the player's family and you've made him out to be a psycho in advance, that'll be fine. It'll be tense, it'll be dramatic, but it's believable, it's reasonable, and it's inevitable that someone that's a psycho will do psychopathic things. Seems pretty fair, right? Obvious points, but those three are what you need to ask yourself all the damn time. And also, one other question not on there is, has this changed the drama? Has this changed the tension? Okay, now we move on to the types. We have material, physical, psychological, sociological. I've gone through them quickly, but there they are. Material. We're going to go through that. Physical, psychological, sociological. We're going to go through all of them in some detail, breaking them down. Each one I would roughly divide into two subcategories. Material and narrative. So material, obviously, I understand it's a make-believe setting. It's storytelling, but it is something you can put in a box. It is something you can take, and there it is. Narrative is more difficult to define, but we're going to do that anyway. I also think about it as rulebook or not non-rulebook, but we'll see. So let's go on to material now. So mechanical material is interesting. We have lots of things here that could potentially be a cost. We have money, mounts, weapon, armor, tools. I put time in here because you can almost quantify time, so therefore it could be seen as a form of material, at least as it's measurable as to do you have it or do you not. Consumables, skills or talents even could be seen as material in some ways, a player's ability. That will probably lump more into physical though. Now, what I would ask you with this is, were these things during this incident, which doesn't have to be combat, it could be a social encounter, was anything lost, stolen, broken, damaged, given or consumed? And not every single incident should have a material consequence. Think about the incident. Is it more of a social incident? Is it psychological? And you can probably mix in one of the other costs as a little side note. Don't feel that you're limited to social consequences from social encounters. You can have a material cost. It could be that you paid a bribe to someone. If the characters have lost all their money to a bribe, sure, that's a cost paid. That's neat. Now the question is though, did it increase the drama or tension? If they can instantly get that money back, it's not a cost. It's a momentary speed bump. It doesn't even register on my cost radar. If it is a notable amount of money, and you as a GM can then reinforce that cost later by having the group back at the tavern, and them not being able to afford a drink, therefore being kicked out into the street, still, they got what they wanted, having bribed the guard and got the information. That's a cost paid. That's a good narrative sense. Now they'll need some money, otherwise they're going to just be sleeping on the streets, and yet they still have their main plot to take care of. This is good. This is good. But do keep in mind, it doesn't have to be stolen. It could be lost. It could have been broken. You could have a combat encounter and think, how do I make this combat encounter increase the drama and tension in my campaign long term? Simple. Very simple. Put the hack ability on a number of enemy weapons. Now their armor is damaged when they get hit. If they don't get hit, fair play. The dice were on your side. Well done. But if a few of them lost armor as a result and don't have an easy way to repair it, then the next few days will be more tense as a result. There will be more drama because they're less well equipped. It's a nice way of looking at it. You also have narrative material as well. This could relate to time as well, just describing consequences of events. Because time has been dilly-dallied, the group have spent time preparing for something, so other things have happened as a result. That would be a narrative material to me. We also have sort of player group goals, etc. That may change depending on what might have been obtained. It might be an item specific to a quest, so it's not just a key, it's a narrative key. It is a key that does a thing you need it to do. So if that was lost or stolen or broken, hey, that's kind of interesting. Now, I also think with material, it's really good to ask the question, can this move the plot forwards and can it become relevant at a later date? And yes, most of them can. Obviously, if your weapon is damaged and you go to a blacksmith to have it repaired, it might not necessarily drive the plot. Maybe the blacksmith can give you some gossip while he's there, though, so you don't feel like it's wasted time. It might not be really super useful, but it might still move things forward a little bit. I'm not saying everything always moves the plot forward, but it's something, if the plot isn't moving, that you could therefore use. You could also have, though, items being stolen by an assassin that enters your room. You're not there. Gosh darn it, not particularly good assassin, it would seem, but they take your weapon, so that when they come back later, they can just sort of stab you for free. I say for free. Not that they were going to charge money anyway, or you would charge money for that matter, but maybe you chase that assassin away and then you see them at a later point in time after they escape, and then you capture them, gain some information that you didn't have, and that's just wonderful. And some of the background cost can also be, yes, you lost your items, but also you now know someone's been hired to kill you. Ugh, that's going to raise the drama and tension. Lovely, lovely jubbly. A good question as well to be considering is, will this be fun to overcome or just simply frustrating to work around? There is a very fine line between the two, but I do think that after you've got to know your players in the first few sessions, you should have an idea as to will they be able to work around this relatively easily, or have you just completely put your finger in their plans and poked it? Have you burst their balloon entirely? Their entire thing of, hey, we'd like to build a cart so we can get down this mountain with our injured compadre who's just lost his leg, so we'd like to be able to do that, and your chosen material cost is that the cart was destroyed during a scuffle in a bar brawl. That is probably more frustrating to work around because it's completely put a spanner in the works. But sometimes spanners in the works are good to do. So if you're walking through the middle of a road in the arse end of nowhere and the road is blocked, that's not that unbelievable. So again, we come back to, is it believable, reasonable, does it feel inevitable? It's not going to feel inevitable that a cart is going to break during a bar fight, unless the fight suddenly moves into the shed and, I don't know. For me, I wouldn't go with that. And the reason is if it's not believable, reasonable, or inevitable, I put this, it will feel like the GM has made the choice to do it, rather than the NPCs. If you have that psychopathic character that kidnaps your family, that bad guy has stolen your family. If they don't know who the bad guy is, or they know no reason as to why that's happening, or what's going on, or the sort of the expected scale of what may happen to them, then the GM did it. The GM did it, not the NPC. So I think a little bit of setting up is useful. A little bit of setting up is useful for these things. So we're going to move on from material to physical now. Now, mechanical, physical, there's loads of things in grimdark settings, not so much higher up. You have to go more for curses and magical whiz-bangs that last around players, or narratively cooked up items that they can't take off, the old cliches, but the good stuff. But in a lot of the dark fantasy settings, Warhammer in particular, you've got loads of injuries, attribute problems, health issues, diseases, etc. You could even throw talents at players as a mechanical, physical consequence of something. Let's say, and this necessarily might not be a physical mechanical, it's more sociological, but let's say the group steal an item and they don't get caught, but someone sees them doing so. They don't do anything about it. They're like, yeah, someone saw us, but it's fine. The guards didn't catch us, so there's therefore no consequences. No, that entire village now knows you did it, because in these days, it was a heinous crime to not report a crime, far worse than the crime that you didn't report. Basically, not reporting a crime is punishable by a fee of 12 gold crown, which you'll never be able to pay. Thus, people talk very quickly, and in a town of 200 to 300, everyone now knows you're a criminal. Congratulations, you've got the criminal talent. Criminals will now work with you, and you can probably earn a little bit more money via your new connections. However, everyone now knows you're a criminal. That's a mechanical, physical, mechanical, sociological. some combination of the two. But you can plan for some of these costs if you feel that it's a very isolated fight that's not going to have any long-term bearings, and you're thinking to yourselves, okay, this is just going to be a we go in and fight and then we move on to the next thing. Maybe there's a narrative reason, but you could throw in some diseases there, because then you know when they arrive to the next town, they're going to have a harder time because a few of them are now ill, depending on dice rolls, obviously. Wounds will be something that will be picked up based on dice, same with injuries. You can't really plan for that, but you can at least plan where you're going to put in enemies that are more likely to inflict certain attribute issues. Poisons, for example. Conditions that will make things slightly more spicy, and some of them will hang around for multiple sessions. So very, very cool idea. I like it. It's something really to be factored in, and it's worth considering as well. How are these mechanical, physical things going to be impactful to your player within the system or setting, and how, as a GM, can you make it so? How can you change how other NPCs, how other players might interact with them? When someone gets cut within a dark fantasy setting, you can say there is a large gash cut open across your chest. Not only has your leather jack got a large tear in it now, but you have blood trickling down your shirt. So when you arrive in the tavern later, you don't just order a drink and say, oh, that will be one penny, please. Have a nice day, bye. It'll be, oh God, what happened to you? Do you mind not putting blood all over my floor? You can reinforce these costs that don't necessarily do so in an unfun way. You can make it apparent that your characters within the story have suffered physical wounds, despite the fact they're not dead. They don't have any stat sheet changes. They simply have scars to show. They have things that just make it look better and make the setting more believable. So this is where some narrative roleplay opportunities come in. You can talk to your players and be like, hey, you're diseased. You could try acting diseased, but remember as a GM too, your NPCs reacting to them being diseased will show them that they're diseased. Show, don't tell. So it's almost it's not always easy to tell a player like, hey, do you mind pretending to be ill? It's like, no, they'll just forget the moment someone asks them a question. But get an NPC to really reinforce that by, as you walk down the street, people put a tissue in front of their mouth and look the other way, having seen your face. That will really sell it. Keep in mind how much fun a player may have, but also, it's dark fantasy and Warhammer. They got what they came for. Is it believable, reasonable, inevitable? Is it fun to overcome or frustrating to work around? Be aware of those as well. Now we go on to psychological changes, psychological costs to players. These in Warhammer could be corruption points. They could be trait changes. It could be specific knowledge. So a knowledge that you were fighting goblins in the woods and ran away because it was a dangerous fight and you thought, we've suffered too much already, we're going to leave this fight, this isn't good, we don't want to do this. Well, maybe you find out later, thus a knowledge, mechanical, psychological change, that those goblins have actually killed a merchant and that merchant was bringing food to this town. Ooh, I like that. It's really, 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 really good when you can tie in previous costs to current situations and keep it thematic as well. If it's in the middle of the winter, you can make sure everything is sort of a wintry theme. Not everything, but a good few things. If it's a lot of goblin related stuff, or there is a green skin in the area that's forming part of your big bad main theme plot problem, then it makes sense if they run away from a fight, there'll be a consequence of that fight at a later time, and that's going to give a psychological cost to your players. That's really neat because it's not necessarily unfun. It reinforces the problem they need to fix. Your players can still be sat there around the table sipping on beer, having a great time, but now they're kind of a little bit more into the consequences of what happened and the negative aspects of the world that have changed. It is maybe good if some of the costs affect the players, absolutely, but there might be groups of players where that's less effective and more of them throw tantrums. So just be aware that costs can be external or internal. That's a really good thing to keep in mind. Should have done a slide on that, really. But there you go. So we have narrative psychological as well. So let's say these corruption points. This is a cool one. You go into a barn. Inside the barn are 8 candles, each at the point of a star on the ground. In the middle of that star is a woman that's now inside out. Skin torn open and sent out into tendrils via her arms and feet to the struts on the barn, either side. Gain 2 corruption points. Make a very difficult roll. It's a very corrupting place right there. Okay, so that's a cost. That's more of a mechanical cost. Is it psychological? Maybe not quite yet, because your character might not just want to naturally roleplay that, but show, don't tell. They now have a voice in their head, asking them for dark deals. When they're sat there with their knife, eating their dinner, they can have that burning temptation all of a sudden and a voice in their head that just wants to get them to stab themselves in the hand. That's nasty. But hey, that really shows them how messed up they are as a result of that. And you can give them a dark deal so they can reduce their corruption points if they do it, but their hand's going to be out of action for the rest of the session. Absolutely great, really grimdark, absolutely wonderful, and a nice mechanical, psychological thing that can happen with some narrative stuff thrown in. Love it! Same questions apply as the others. Is it believable, reasonable, and inevitable? Love it. Anywho, we move on to sociological, and this is a really fun one. I like this, I really do. Keep in mind a general concept for this, remember from the incident video, that other people in the world do not have the same views as yourself. Remember those situations when you're in a horror film, out in the woods, monsters stalking you, it's eaten most of your food, you've hardly got any left. Someone will have the view system that you should go out and kill it. There will be that person there who will say, look, we need to go out and kill it before we all die. We'll go out, hunt it when it's sleeping, during the day, and we'll deal with it. Nice. That's a strong thematic character. That is just completely believable and inevitable and reasonable. And we could have someone else saying, hey, let's just give it loads of food and then run. So basically, we'll just go and give all of our food to it. Maybe keep like a sandwich left over, and we're going to try and run, brave the storm, and go to the next town. That way, it's less likely to hunt us down as we leave. That's pretty reasonable as well. That person might not be combat inclined. They might be a parent. They might not be wanting to risk their own health. Someone else might say, hey, no, we should stay still. This is a really bad idea. Basically, whatever idea you get, someone in that world will believe that strongly, and they will have reasons for doing so. Brilliant. So now, when you as a player are presented with the issue of, or the incident of 3 of the remaining 8 villagers going out in the woods in the day, you have the issue of, do you go with them, do you not? And you can say to yourself as a GM, what do all of these various NPCs think of the group for doing XYZ? Did they go with? What do we think of them because of that? Did they not go with? If you have those opposing views, and really, this is so important, don't come up with backstories for NPCs, don't bother with stat sheets for most of them, give them all just basic human stats. That's way less important than having those concepts in your head as to what are their belief systems. If you know their belief systems, you can do this so much more easily. The group go out into the woods with the hunting party. The individuals who were more cautious will respect them less as a result and be more frosty to them in future. That can have simple mechanical sociological effects of having difficulty getting on with them. Maybe the others now have animosity toward them for getting 3 people killed, which they inevitably will do because we've seen enough horror films to know how that scene ends. This is so overlooked, I think, in a lot, but having those social dynamics in a game is fascinating. Love it. Not every group will be super into it, but seeing those interpersonal clashes unfold makes and allows for some really interesting RP. And we know as human beings how to discuss with other individuals with those views, because even though the view makes sense, you can clearly see there are drawbacks, and they will have their reasons and you will have your reasons, and you can have a decent, reasonable conversation between, and then the players can choose whether or not they change their mind, whether or not they're swayed over to the argument. If NPCs can be charm test out of their belief system, firstly, I would say it's not a belief system. So it will be a case of, if one person is really, really into going out and killing the stuff, your charm test will be to maybe convince them to wait a while or to do something reasonable, because these traits, these belief systems will do this more in NPC creation. They define the person, and if you can roll a charm test to undefine the person, it doesn't define them anymore. It breaks their character. So they need to be a thing that you can see in your head that is real, and it is the person that wants to fight. It is the person that's obsessed with testicles, balls, guts. It is that sort of character. And if you roll a charm test and they no longer want to fight, it's not that character. It was just someone with an idea, like a jock or something. It was like, yeah, let's go out and fight. And then you're like, actually, no, it's a really big monster. And they go, oh, okay, maybe we won't go fight. That's now a completely different character, and you may have just broken your NPC's personality, basically. Anyway, that is a job for another video. We're not doing 2 at this one. This has been half an hour already, but hopefully you found this useful. I think it's a great way of starting to evaluate what you can do to your players, still making things fun, but gradually raising the stakes and tension, and just introducing some different aspects to incidents to make them have interesting consequences to the players, to the world, and to the setting. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for stopping by. Please leave some comments down below, because I love reading them. It makes me happy in my happies. And make sure to leave some ideas for future videos. I do have a decent logbook now of ideas, but I love them all, so keep them coming. And like, subscribe, check out the other stuff. There's all sorts of things everywhere. So do some of that, and I'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.